You, as a business owner, you have the responsibility to set the tone and the culture of your business. When I was an auditor, I was a corporate auditor for 25 years. We would follow auditing standards, and those auditing standards. That's not a really interesting sounding story, but I'm telling a story that really resonated with me over my career as I converted from being a auditor to being a CFO consultant and business leader and business coach. So uh, back to the story. When I was an auditor, we followed audit standards, and those audit standards required us to perform certain procedures. We had procedures that we performed in planning, during field work, at the end, and we had these procedures and standards that we had to follow. One of those standards was to evaluate the client that we're auditing, evaluate their tone at the top, evaluate the leadership's tone, the culture setting. And it never really resonated with me as an auditor until or I'll say it a different way. It started to resonate with me in a more resounding way when I became a fractional CFO, when I started sitting, quote, on the other side of the table, when I started working alongside business owners, leaders, when I wasn't their corporate auditor, when I wasn't there to find mistakes and to evaluate their financial reporting, but when I was there to help them in their business as a fractional or interim CFO, the concept of tone at the top really hit home more so than it ever did when I was an auditor. And it made me understand why, as auditors, we needed to understand the tone at the top. The what is leadership conveying to the staff, to the clientele, to vendors? What sort of culture is being set by the leadership? And it made me understand more than ever. And I've been doing this aspect of my career, the non-auditing aspect, for going on 9 or 10 years now. And it really made me understand the the concept and the importance of tone at the top and culture setting. Hello, my name's Carl Baker. I own Baker CFO Advisory. We are an accounting firm providing accounting, tax, bookkeeping, advisory work, fractional CFO work, and we're continuing our series on ways to help business owners with their business. Why? Is a accountant. I'm a licensed CPA. Why? And you just heard me say I'm a former auditor. Why am I talking about culture? Why are we not talking about debits, credits, taxes, financial reporting? Because none of that matters if an organization isn't successful. One of the keys to being successful is establishing a good business structure, and that is done through having good leadership. And leadership then will direct the tone and the culture of the organization. What sort of organization is are you going to set? So I think it's important to talk about this, and this won't be a lot of there won't be a lot of accounting with this. And if we want to do that, we can do that in another session. But as we talk about ways to be successful, I wanted to talk about that. Plus, the reality is, I'm working with a lot of closely held businesses, and they're not necessarily spending thousands of dollars on business coaches. I oftentimes am sort of serving in that role with a business owner or a CEO. So I enjoy that, embrace it, and just want to convey some of the things that I've learned as I've worked with businesses over the last 33, 34 years. So that's why we're doing this. And hopefully it will make some sense to you. Thanks for joining us. And again, thanks. Well, I'll just say it again. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe to our channel. Like this page. That would really be appreciated and would really help with our following. So please do that. And let's go ahead and get started now. If you have a business, this is really true. If you have a business, and I referenced this, I think, in the last time. If you have a business, you have a culture. Whether you know it or not, whether you've said it intentionally or not, whether you have overtly expressed your views on the way the business is going to run or not, whether you've done any of those things, you have a culture. Your staff members are going to follow your lead. Your clients are going to, and customer base, they're going to follow your lead. They're going to understand whether you are predictable, whether you are reliable, whether you do what you say you're going to do, and all of those things, whether it be from your clientele, your customer base, your vendors, do you pay your bills on time? Your staff members, are you adding good mentoring, good processes? All of those things contribute to your overall culture. So I come back to, you have a culture. Is the culture that you're setting intentional or accidental? And I think that's really important to understand. If you understand that, and if you care, which I'm sure you do, then hopefully, and if you recognize some things, some shortfalls, we're all human, we all fall short, but we continue with continuous improvement efforts. Hopefully, this session will give you a few tidbits. So, this session is really for a closely held business, small business. I like to use the word closely held business because it might be small in size, but it's not small in scope. Your business is important to you. I just try to avoid the use of the word small business. You're an important business. You're adding to the community. So we use the language closely held businesses, but you might not have the staff that IBM or Apple have. So you have a team that's manageable and you can count them on one or two hands. So small teams feel simple until they're not. There may not be formal roles, there may not be clear systems, and then everything depends on who notices first that something needs to happen. And that works for a while. Frankly, let's be real. When a business is getting started, every day you're encountering something new that you're needing to address. And so this works for a while until you get to a point where it doesn't work, where things start to slip, things start to fall behind, errors start to be made, deadlines start to be missed, whatever, bills aren't getting paid if it's in the finance realm. So small teams feel simple until they're not. So what do we mean by culture? Culture is the concept of how work actually gets done. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you hear me reference the way. What is the way we do our business? And I think about that in my own business. And by the way, as we talk about this, I'm going to say that I try to pay attention to the things that I need to do in my own business. So I am not 100% perfect in the application of all of these principles that we'll talk about today in my own business, but I certainly try to pay attention to these. And I usually learn something from these in my own sphere of influence and the things that I'm doing in my own business. So I'm talking to myself just as much as to clientele and possible listeners here. So I think that's important to understand. So it is a truth that every organization has a way, and I call it the way that you do your business. It shows up in the way you make decisions or lack thereof or timing of those decisions. Are you holding staff accountable? And that's not meant to be a micromanagement negative connotative expression, but it's true that we ask staff members to do something and they need to follow the deadlines so that we keep our promises true with our clientele, with our customer base, with our vendors. So there is accountability, and the only way life works is if we all are willing to be accountable. What sort of communication? Is it clear? Is it vague? Is it passive aggressive? What sort of priorities are set? Does everybody know what those priorities are? So I think those are the things that collectively uh, show up and define what an organization's culture is. I think it's also important to understand that as a business grows, the earlier you identify the importance of this and operate with the awareness of the importance of culture setting, the better off you'll be, because you'll start to scale. And without the awareness of culture, without the awareness of processes that are the byproduct of the culture setting, without that, you'll end up with chaos. And I just think it's important to put procedures, protocols, policies, documentation in place before the chaos ensues. And I've talked about that before, but the culture setting is to demand, insist on, pull people along into a culture of excellence in which in the early days, we're going to establish the way we do things, and we're going to memorialize those. We're going to set policies, procedures, roles. And the earlier you do that before chaos ensues, the better it will be for you. It sometimes will feel like, and I actually am pretty decent in this in my own business as we scale, as we grow. I am very aware of protocols that we need to put in place now that maybe doesn't feel like we really need it because of a lack of volume in ABC area. But as we grow, the importance of those protocols will be come to light and will not resonate, but will just I'll just stick with that, come to light, um, and will present itself. And the more you put these procedures in place earlier in the time frame, the better. So adding clarity, what is it that we're building? If everything matters, nothing matters. Defining success, defining priorities, defining what good enough is. That's an interesting phrase. If a person gets too hung up in excellence so that you get stuck on everything and spend hours on every little thing, it can actually get too extreme. So understanding what's good enough, the 80% rule, and don't let perfection get in the way of good in some categories, in some ways you do things. I think that's important to understand that as well. So being aware of that. Ownership. So this is important as you start to leverage work. It's oftentimes true that an organization, when they start, a business owner starts, they may not have staff. They may be doing everything. We've talked about that, wearing all the hats. And at some point, you start to leverage. At, hopefully, sooner rather than later, as you're building a following, as you're building your clientele, your customer base, and you start to add staff, it's important to understand who does what. Small teams will fail when everybody, and I put this phrase in here, kind of owns everything. Everybody just sort of recognizes what needs to be done and everybody pitches in and it feels good for a while. You have this collaborative team effort, but at some point there needs to be some silos. And I say that at the risk of overstating the use of silos. Silos can become problems because you end up with teams that are taking ownership in their little sphere and not helping out. But on the other end of the extreme is a team where everybody does everything and there's no distinctive roles. So I was actually listening to a podcast last week, and it happened to be a podcast on running a more effective accounting firm. And this leader was talking about the difference between having a job description and having key roles and assignments defined. And I thought that was interesting. And I think that the more a person is able to give a staff member their roles, give them their responsibilities, give them their uh, empower them to understand how to do their job so that they can do their job within the guardrails established for them. They don't need to ask permission for everything, but understand what those guardrails are and empower them to do those to do the job with memorialized processes will create a culture, will create an environment in which people will feel empowered to thrive and take ownership in their job. So the more a person is able to do that, adding clarity, adding where those guardrails begin and end, so that not everything has to be micromanaged by the owner. I think that's just very important and will contribute to a successful business and a successful culture. Communication rhythm. How do we stay aligned? Alignment doesn't happen naturally. There does need to be some check-in with staff members. And I'll be honest, again, I come back to my own example. I realized recently where we needed to have some team meetings. And I have on my slide here that sometimes the importance of that is the importance of check-ins are such that you might have weekly check-ins, maybe they're quarterly, maybe they're monthly, and it depends on the audience. But the gist of it is a person needs to have a leader needs to have check-ins with their staff. Everything can't be done via email, via Slack chat, via Google chat, whatever your communication tools are that you're using. It is a truth that verbal, in person, or audio, depending on if you're in multiple states or locations, it's a truth that having time set aside where we can check in with people, determine whether everybody has the resources they need, the time available to complete their work in a timely process. Just that weekly check-in or periodic check-in is important, uh, so that everybody is to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that priorities are still aligned properly. Next slide. What quietly destroys small teams culture? And we've sort of alluded to a lot of these before. They include inconsistency, assumptions instead of clarity, assumptions by the leader, by the way, and then if the leader assumes that staff will figure things out, and the staff do not have the clear direction they need, then they will make assumptions about what to have happen, and now you have two bodies, the leader and the staff member, making assumptions. What are the chances that those two assumptions will line up exactly? Probably not. So you end up with silent misalignment. You end up with a lack of communication. You end up with no, as we have in the slide here, no feedback loop. If a leader is not adding the clarity, providing instruction, providing the mentoring, and if they're also kicking the can down the road in certain things that need to be addressed now, the "we'll figure it out later" commentary, all those things contribute to staff drawing conclusions about the way you want to run your business and the way things happen. And that will be different than an organization that is crisp and has a culture of excellence such that things happen in a timely, predictable way. And there will just be a difference in the way those two businesses run. So as we segue into what we've talked about, the problems that come from this, what needs to happen? How is it that you establish this culture? Well, depending on where you are in your business cycle, I say keep it simple, keep it visible, memorialize it. You don't necessarily need more systems, you need clearer ones. Start with two or three top priorities. If you have job descriptions, great. If you don't, make job descriptions. I mentioned the idea of a document that is over and above a job description. that is a key role assignment, a key role document that will um, be a little more specific about the role besides a job description. Put out documentation about the way that we do our business. What are our values? What's our mission? What are the things we're trying to accomplish? How do we work? Um, have a rhythm for a weekly check-in or periodic check-in if you don't want to do weekly, but have the rhythm and then stick to it. Don't cancel it all the time. Um, have a shared task board so that everybody understands what the work load is, what work flow looks like, and start with something as simple as that. And then as you grow, then you'll have a better understanding as to what to add to that. The other thing I'd say is ask your staff members, what are the resources they need? What sort of clarity do they need? What do they need from you as leaders to help them do their job? If you ask them that and you hadn't been doing that, and that will show a difference. And I think that will resonate with the staff and they'll start to come alongside. So, what does a organization that has not had a culture of excellence look like versus what starts to happen? What does that transition look like? Before a culture setting initiative, a culture of excellence, before that we have confusion, probably have duplicated work. To be honest, it probably feels okay for a while because everybody's working together, everybody's collaborating, everybody is chipping in. It feels okay for a while, I have to admit, but it's going to result in problems as the organization scales. Deadlines will be missed, mistakes will be made. Somebody will assume ABC person is doing that job, a task. ABC will assume you're doing it. Then you end up where neither one of you do it, mistakes made, tasks aren't completed, etc. After that, if you move into a new way of doing things, you have clear roles, faster execution, less stress, more defined clarity around who does what, when, how. Um, all of those things defined more clearly will produce a culture and will produce a better experience. Let's not forget, why are we doing this? Besides earning a living, we're doing this to provide a good service to our community. And the community, your clientele, your following will notice this when you are being predictable, when you are being reliable, when you say you're going to do something on the second of the month, each month, and it comes out on the second, not the third, then those kind of things will resonate with your client base and your customer base. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get done here is meet a need in the community, solving some sort of a problem in a community in an excellent way. So as we start to wrap this up, 3 questions every small team should answer. What are we responsible for? What does good look like? Because I keep talking about a culture of excellence, but that doesn't mean that you get mired in the details so much that you can't get anything done. You can end up with analysis paralysis. So it's important to come back to what does good look like, and we could put good in all caps, not good as in good enough, okay, but as in good, not perfect. Perfect, if an organization strives for perfection, then that's where things you can end up with analysis paralysis. But good as defined in a way that is excellent, but not necessarily mm, uh, perfect. So how do we know if we're off track? That's another great question to ask. How do we know if we're off track? And measuring that in a way with our weekly or periodic check-ins, measuring that in a way that is manageable, quantitative, in a certain way will help us know when we're getting off track. And then having the culture where everybody understands when that does start to happen, we talk about it. We don't beat each other up. We're not pointing fingers, but we're maintaining our truth of excellence. And that will produce a culture of of good customer service and providing a great experience and um, setting for everybody to work in. I've talked about it before. Thank you again for coming to our session. And we have some great materials online, bakercfoadvisory.com. We have white papers relating to this subject and all of our past subjects. And as we encounter, as time transpires and we come to the next session, we put white papers up relating to these. You can refer back to them. I also say you can always come back to us, ask us questions, ask us for some clarity, ask us for more examples. So I end with some closing comments. Culture is built in repetition, not intention alone. How you repeat becomes your system, and what you tolerate becomes your culture. So I think it's important as you build your business, as you are engaging with your following, as you are training your staff, just having this insistence upon predictability in the way you do things will make a difference. Sometimes it feels like you're micromanaging. And so I'm not meaning that, but I hope this makes sense. And you've probably been in settings where this is done effectively, and it can also be done in a over the top way, but it's up to you as a leader to instill the culture with your way of doing and building your business in an excellent fashion. So I'd say that's my ending comment related to that. Stay tuned in the month of July. We will continue our series. We'll talk to you as business owners about how to think like a business owner, not an employee of your company. So as you're instilling this culture, it's also important to understand that you can't always work in the business. You have to work on the business. This subject that we've talked about today is one in which you work on the business intentionally, and we're going to dive into that a little more deeply next month with next month's session. Look forward to that. Thank you again. My phone number's on this slide. It's 314-403-7745. It'll be in the show notes. You'll also note, I want to do a shout out to podcast listeners. This is starting with a YouTube video. You can find us. You can just look my name up, Carl Baker, on YouTube. But this is also being translated and will show up on our podcast for our show called CFO Squared. And you can find us on all the places you listen to podcasts. So thank you for that. Email carl@bakercfoadvisory.com. You can find all the information on our website, bakercfoadvisory.com. Really appreciate you watching today, listening, as it were. And thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. God bless.